Have you ever thought about how many inexplicable, scary, and sometimes paranormal phenomena occur in the world every day? And how many such terrible stories have happened in the history of mankind? Today, I want to talk about such a phenomenon as haunted dolls. It is about them that a huge number of horror films have been shot, and many will agree that horror films with dolls are the scariest films of the genre. In this video, Mr. Top F will tell you about 5 real-life haunted dolls, their history, facts about them, and evidence of existence. By the way, if you love not only cool paranormal stories on YouTube, but also cool clothes, visit my merch store, where you can find great high-quality merch with a unique design and get it at a discount. To do this, follow the link in the description. Meanwhile, we start. Annabelle. In 1970, Donna, a student graduating from nursing and already working in this specialty, received from her mother a large rag doll purchased in a handmade store as a birthday present from her mother. She was supposed to decorate the apartment that Donna rented with her friend Angie, also a nurse. There was nothing demonic about the doll, about 1 meter high, with big eyes, a smiling mouth, red hair, and a triangular piece of red fabric sewn on as a nose. Her place was Donna's bed, and after a few days began to notice something strange. Every morning I sat her on a made bed. Her arms were at her sides, her legs were stretched out, Donna reported. When we returned home in the evening, we found that her limbs were in a different position. For example, her legs were crossed, and her arms were folded on her knees. After about a week, suspicions began to arise. I decided on purpose to leave the doll with arms and legs crossed and see what happens in the evening. Upon returning home, we found the doll with her arms spread out. Each time we found her in all sorts of positions. All this seemed strange, but the girls did not panic. Then the doll, at that time still nameless, began to travel through the rooms. Angie described it this way: one evening we came back and found the doll on a chair at the front door. She was on her knees. Interestingly, when we tried to put her in this position ourselves, she immediately turned over. Another time she appeared on the couch, even though before that we left her in Donna's room behind a closed door. Another manifestation of supernatural activity was noted with strange inscriptions appearing in the room from nowhere. For example, "Call me," written in crooked handwriting. Everything looked as if a child had left them. Donna and Angie quickly found out that they did not have the paper and pencil they used to write the notes. They concluded that someone had broken in and rummaged through their belongings during their absence. To prove this, they used a few tricks borrowed from spy movies. Windows were sealed, and rugs and small items were placed in such a way that a person moving around the rooms would certainly move them. But it did not help. It seemed that the force that moved the doll was still inside. Spirit invitation. Donna and Angie, as a heavy figurine rose into the air before their very eyes and crashed to the floor, were convinced that their case was clearly unusual. When one day they found blood on the doll, they began to seek outside help. From the testimony of one of the girls, on our return, we noticed traces of blood on the hand of the doll and a few drops on her body. This frightened us. This has been going on for about a month and a half since the appearance of the doll in the apartment. Not knowing who could help them, the nurses invited a woman who had mediumistic abilities into the house. From her, they learned some surprising details. It turned out that a girl died here, says Donna. She was 7 years old, and her name was Annabelle Higgins. The medium reported that her spirit played in these meadows long before buildings were built here. Since now everyone is only concerned with the pursuit of work, the spirit could not attract anyone's attention. And he showed up with us with the hope that we would understand him. Therefore, he moved the rag doll. Annabelle wanted to stay with us and move in with the doll. What else could we do? We let her do it. Since that time, the doll has been given the name of the deceased girl. Donna and Angie, however, did not realize that inviting a spirit during a seance would have serious consequences. They were physical attacks of an invisible force directed at their friend named Lou. The latter admitted that from the very beginning, He subconsciously felt that something was wrong with this doll. She disgusted him, and he advised the girls to get rid of her. The man also claimed that once, during an overnight stay with them, he had a real nightmare about Annabelle in the title role, which later came true. Lou was with Angie, studying a map of the tourist route he planned to take the next day. Suddenly, a noise came from Donna's room. Lou reacted instantly and, assuming it was a robber, went to the door. The noise stopped. They turned on the light and saw Annabelle lying on the floor. What happened after, Angie described as follows. Lou looked around and it turned out that there was no one there, but suddenly he began to yell and clutched his chest. When I ran up to him, he fell over and began to bleed. There was blood in many places on his shirt. He was shaking. We went into the living room, and when I unbuttoned his shirt, there were scratches on his chest that looked like claw marks. There were 7 of them, 3 transverse and 4 longitudinal. Last resort. For help, the nurses turned to the familiar priest Hagen, who, after listening to their story, referred them to a certain Father Cook. He reported this case to experts in complex paranormal cases Ed and Lorraine Warren, a former police officer, an expert in demonology, and his wife, who has a mediumistic gift. After investigating the case, Ed delivered his verdict: the doll is not possessed. Spirits do not take possession of objects, only people. It was the spirit that moved the doll so that it seemed to be alive. And since you believed that this was the spirit of little Annabelle, this force suggested this image. In other words, you opened up and were used by an evil spirit, of course, with your consent. At the same time, he emphasized that this something that settled with Donna and Angie was evil, and it revealed its true essence by attacking Lou. In Donna and Angie's apartment, in the presence of the Warrens, Father Cook performed an exorcism. At the end, he blessed the audience and all the premises. There were no paranormal incidents. To appease the women, the Warrens decided to take Annabelle with them. But, as the exorcist later confirmed, no Annabelle ever existed. Through a seance, the girls attracted a dangerous otherworldly entity. Annabelle wasn't here, Father Cook said. We encountered a spirit. Everything that happened here played out according to a certain scenario, which means there was a certain mind behind it. In addition, spirits cannot provoke phenomena such tension. They do not have enough strength for this. Something inhuman, demonic took place here. The Warrens did not reveal the secret in which place this incident occurred. It was one of the first high-profile cases in which they took part. A year later, they helped with the difficult case of the parents' troubled home in Harrisville, the story of which was presented in the film The Conjuring, 2013. But the Warrens were best known for their investigation of the Amityville case in the latter half of the 1970s. Their activities and effectiveness in the fight against demonic entities have caused and will continue to cause controversy, since this area belongs to the area that can only be taken on faith. As for the rag Annabelle, her story is still not over. She ended up in a special room in the Warrens' house, where they stored various magical and cursed items. They say that the doll is still dangerous, which is why it was placed in a glass case with a sign "Do not open." If you've watched this far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Meanwhile, we continue. Robert the Doll. It all started in the early 1900s, when a wealthy doctor named Otto lived in Key West, Florida. Once he brought several servants from the Bahamas, or rather real slaves, whom he treated strictly and who worked tirelessly in his house and on the site. This doctor had 2 children, a son, Robert Eugene Otto, and a slightly younger daughter. When the girl was 4 years old, one of the Caribbean maids gave her a homemade doll in the form of a sailor, made of cloth stuffed with straw and sawdust. The doll reached 1 meter in height and looked like a small child in terms of parameters. Robert's hair was particularly unusual, with persistent rumors that it was originally made from real human hair and later replaced with synthetic wool. It is believed that the maid who sewed this doll and gave it to the child was actually a voodoo sorceress, and this doll was bewitched by her in order to take revenge on her cruel master. For this purpose, she sewed a so-called soul stone somewhere inside the doll. This stone was able to take the soul from a person. Shortly after this gift, the little girl died and the toy passed to her brother Robert. He liked her very much at first sight and began to carry the toy everywhere, giving her his own name, Robert Eugene, and demanding that everyone else call her that too. Later, in order to separate his name from the name of the doll, the boy began to demand that the doll be called Eugene, and he was called only Robert. Every day the boy's enthusiasm for this doll increased. He didn't need any more friends for games. He went everywhere with this doll, and the inhabitants of the house saw many times that he even talks to her like a living person. This seemed unusual, strange, and frightening to many, but even more terrible were the rumors that the doll also talked to the boy, answering him and moving his eyes, winking. And then different things began to happen, and if something broke or deteriorated in the house, which the boy could do, he said that it was not he who did it, but the Eugene doll. And now a lot of things were broken and spoiled. Plates were broken, silverware was scattered on the floor, the boy's clothes, his jacket, trousers, and stockings were somehow torn all the time. There were also tears in the bed linen, even on what was stored in a chest of drawers. Bed linen in other bedrooms, someone began to dump on the floor and wrinkle. Then someone began to disfigure, break and maim other Robert's toys, even those with which the boy had not parted before. Several servants swore too that they had repeatedly heard little Robert talking to someone, being alone in his room, and that a very thin voice answered him. At some point, these conversations ceased to be friendly. Robert's voice began to sound excited. He did not want to do something, and a thin voice persuaded him. These moments disturbed not only the servants, but also the boy's mother. Once she herself heard these voices and immediately burst into her son's room. She found him sitting on the floor in the corner, completely upset about something, while the doll was sitting on a chair and looking directly at the boy. And this went on for several more years before Robert grew up, went to school in Paris, and then remained to live in France. Robert returned from France to his parents' mansion in Key West only when he was already quite an adult and married a girl named Anne. This house is now known as the artist's house because Robert Eugene Otto became an artist. At the same time, his love for his old doll did not weaken. Shortly after his arrival, he ordered that a special miniature house be built for the doll, along with elegant Victorian-style furniture. Due to the fact that Robert continued to carry the doll with him everywhere, his marriage quickly turned into a disaster. He even seated the doll on a chair next to the matrimonial bed and took it to the dining room. By that time, stories about the strange doll and its possessed owner had spread far beyond this house. All the children in the neighborhood knew that there was an unusual doll in this house, and they always looked at her sitting by the window when they walked past this mansion on the way to school. They soon began to say that the doll can independently move from place to place because it changed its location while there was no one in the house at that time. Robert's relationship with Anne did not work out. They often began to quarrel, and sometimes Robert even locked his wife in a small room for several days. This went on for several decades. In 1974, the elderly Robert died, and as soon as he was buried in the local cemetery, his wife immediately left his house and threw the unpleasant doll into the attic. She wrote a lease agreement, according to which all tenants of this house who will live here should not pull the doll out of the attic, and she should always be there alone. However, she also died 2 years later. When the tenants moved into the house, they immediately began to report that someone was making noise upstairs, walking, and laughter was heard. They went upstairs and saw that the Robert doll was not where it had been left the previous time. She either moved to another chair, or crossed her arms, or crossed her legs. The worried tenants eventually locked the doll in a chest in the same room, but the doll didn't seem to like it. Now the noise and footsteps are even louder. One night, one of the residents woke up with horror and saw that the doll was standing right next to his bed, and a large knife was clamped in her handle. After that, the tenants moved out, but soon new ones arrived. They had a 10-year-old daughter, Myrtle, and now the doll began to bother her because the girl found her in the attic and took her to her bedroom. One day, the girl's parents came to her late in the evening and saw that the doll was sitting on the back of Myrtle's bed. In 1994, the grown-up Myrtle herself handed over the doll to the Florida History Museum, saying that the doll was definitely cursed and that she could walk on her own. Since then, the Robert doll has been in this museum, where she was placed in a glass cabinet and seated on a chair. According to museum visitors, next to this doll, they run out of batteries in phones and cameras, and if everything was in order with the batteries, then the cameras could simply refuse to work normally. Okikudal. The story began in 1918 when a boy bought a doll on the island of Hokkaido as a gift for his sister. The girl was very happy with the doll and began to play with it all day long. She was so passionate about the doll that she gave the doll the same name as her own, Okiku. The child took the doll with him, even leaving the house for walks. But suddenly the girl became very ill, and after a while she died. In memory of their beloved daughter, the girl's parents put the doll on the family altar. Soon they began to notice strange things. The doll's pitch-black straight hair began to increase in length every day. When the doll's hair grew to the knees, the girl's parents finally believed that the spirit of their daughter had entered the doll's body. They began to cut the doll's hair, and each time the hair grew back, stopping at the level of the knees. The deceased Okiku had exactly that length of hair. In 1938, the family moved to Sakhalin, but they were afraid to take the doll with them. Instead, they brought her to the Manenji Temple in Iwamizawa, Hokkaido, after telling the temple attendant about her abnormal hair. The servant was not afraid of the doll, but on the contrary placed it in a special wooden box in a conspicuous place. The doll is still in this temple, and attendants regularly cut Okiku's hair. The story of Okiku quickly became known throughout Japan and became a cultural phenomenon. She has been described in books and staged performances in the traditional kabuki style. But the mystery of the doll's hair remains unsolved. No one has dared to investigate what really happens to the doll's hair and how exactly it grows back. Mandy the doll. The Mandy doll lives in the Canal Museum, which is located on the Old Caribou Gold Rush Trail in British Columbia, Canada. There it is, just one of more than 30,000 exhibits on display to the public, but there is no doubt that it is the most unique. Mandy was donated to the museum in 1991. At that time, her clothes were dirty, her body was torn, and her head was cracked. At that time, she was over 90 years old. The museum says she may seem like an ordinary antique doll, but she is much more. The woman who donated Mandy, also called Miranda, told the museum curator that she wakes up in the middle of the night to hear a baby crying from the basement. As she explored, she found that the window next to the doll was open where it was previously closed, with curtains blowing in the breeze. The donor later told the curator that after the doll was donated to the museum, she was no longer disturbed by the sounds of the baby's nightly cries. Some say that Mandy has unusual powers. Many speculate that the doll acquired these abilities over the years, but since little is known about the history of the doll, nothing can be said for sure. There is no doubt that she makes an unusual impression on everyone around. As soon as Mandy arrived at the museum, staff and volunteers began to have strange and inexplicable experiences. The meals disappeared from the refrigerator and were later found hidden in a drawer. Footsteps were heard when no one was around. Pens, books, photographs, and many other little things were lost. Some were never found, and some were discovered later. The staff took these events as distraction, but not all. Ever since she was left alone in the window forever, there have been many stories of encounters with the haunted doll. One visitor filmed Mandy only to have the camera light turn on and off every 5 seconds. When the visitor's camera was turned onto another exhibit, it worked fine. It's interesting to note that the same thing often happens when visitors try to take pictures of Robert's doll in his house museum in Key West. Some visitors are very disturbed by the doll's eyes, which they say follow them around the room. Others claim to have seen the doll actually blink, while still others say they have seen the doll in one position and after a few minutes it appears to be moving. Although they have gotten used to it, museum staff and volunteers still prefer not to be the last to work or to lock up the museum at the end of the day. Leonard the Doll. In 1970, Australian Kerry Walton came to the small town of Wagga Wagga for his grandmother's funeral. After the funeral, he decided to inspect the neighboring house, which had frightened him all his childhood. Passing through the rooms, already at the exit, Kerry looked under the porch and found a puppet doll there, which subsequently changed his life. An unexpected found toy was strange, a dwarf in an antique green coat, with glassy eyes, a long nose, and a tuft of black hair. The man was also struck by the terrible face of the doll, which looked at him with a frightening smile. Kerry Walton recalled, "Seeing the face of this doll is unpleasant even during the day, and at night it's generally a nightmare. But, despite this, I took the doll home, as if by some kind of inspiration. Although a completely logical explanation for the act was born in my head, this is an antique thing. It must be very valuable." When Kerry Walton brought the find home, his two young children greeted the doll with tears and hysterics. The new owner named the puppet Letta. Kerry himself did not understand why he chose this particular name, but over time he received an answer. Possessed doll. With the advent of Letta, strange things began to happen in the Walton house. There was an oppressive atmosphere in the room with the doll. Next to her, people felt discomfort and even nausea. The Waltons have repeatedly noticed with surprise that the puppet changes its position and its arms and head move. Kerry recalled, "Our dogs hated Letta. Every time they were near her, they tried to attack the doll and bite her." Kerry Walton decided that the toy was related to otherworldly forces and turned to psychics. It turned out that the doll became possessed 200 years ago in Romania. Local gypsies believed in the transmigration of the souls of dead people into dolls. When a gypsy woman's son drowned, the witch performed a ceremony and transferred his soul to the Walton puppet. Letta actually has human hair, and in the head of the doll is a piece of human skin. Psychics also explained the meaning of the doll's name, which is actually an abbreviation. The word Letta is an abbreviated phrase, "let me out." After learning about the history of the toy, the man decided to sell it, but something always bothered him. Kerry recalled, "I was desperate for money and I arranged to sell the doll for $400 to a woman. But when I arrived at the meeting, I felt that I just could not get this damned doll out of the car. I can't explain it, but some force was pushing me away. I can negotiate to sell this monster even for $1 million, but still I can't physically do it." He also could not destroy the doll, burn it, or break it. Kerry is sure that this is how the toy protected itself and did not allow him to harm her. Through neighbors and friends, the story of the puppet reached the media, and Kerry Walton was invited to a TV show where he spoke about the sinister toy all over Australia. The doll is still in the Walton house today, and Kerry himself now admits that he has developed friendly relations with her. The man jokingly calls her a doll from hell. That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to catch all new releases.